Welcome to FAA Part 107, Operations Over Human Beings, also known as Flying Over Crowds of People and Operations Over People. In the past, Part 107.39 required remote pilots to apply for a waiver to fly their drone over crowds of people. Today, 107.39 has been expanded by creating subpart D, which provides 4 distinct flight categories. Each category represents a different operational risk based on the level of transferable kinetic energy a particular drone may create upon impact. That is, low-risk drones weighing less than 0.55 pounds would have less of an impact than larger drones weighing over 100 pounds used for crop dusting or topography. Larger drones that classify under categories 2, 3, and 4 represent a higher level of risk that will require documentation and additional safety measures. So regardless of your final intentions on how you plan to use your remote pilot certificate, Part 107 will require you to become familiar with all 4 flight categories and their corresponding risks. Now, Subpart D prescribes the eligibility and operating requirements for civil small unmanned aircraft to operate over human beings or over moving vehicles in the United States, in addition to those operations permitted by 107.39A and B. Now, 107.39 of Part 107 states that no person may operate a small unmanned aircraft over a human being unless that human being is directly participating in the operation of the small unmanned aircraft, or that human being is located under a covered structure or inside a stationary vehicle that can provide reasonable protection from a falling unmanned aircraft, and the person meets the requirements of at least one of the operational categories specified in this subpart D. Now, a remote pilot is permitted to operate an SUAS that is classified in more than one category, but only if the remote pilot cannot inadvertently switch between modes or configurations. So that is, it's plausible a drone operator may use a single drone that is classified in both Category 2 and Category 3. So again, Subpart D provides remote pilots with 4 categories of operations. The ability to fly over people varies depending on the level of risks that a small UAS operation presents to the people on the ground. Operations over people are permitted subject to the following requirements. Category 1, the small unmanned aircraft are permitted to operate over people provided the small unmanned aircraft weighs less than 0.55 pounds, including everything that is on board or otherwise attached to the aircraft at the time of takeoff and throughout the duration of each operation. It must not contain any exposed rotating parts that would cause lacerations. So in the example of this small drone here, if you put propeller guards on it, it would weigh more than 0.55 pounds. The SUAS must be compliant with remote ID, and Category 1 operations do not require additional drone labeling or a declaration of compliance, which we will review shortly. So Category 2 and Category 3 operations, the drone must meet all 3 of the following safety level criteria. It must not cause injury to a human being that is equivalent to or greater than the severity of injury caused by a transfer of designated foot-pounds of kinetic energy upon impact from a rigid object. Category 2 operations is 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Category 3 operations is 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. It must not contain any exposed rotating parts that could lacerate human skin upon contact with said human being. and it does not contain any safety defects identified by the administrator, and that is with the FAA. Category 3 small unmanned aircraft systems have further operating restrictions. A remote pilot in command may not operate a small unmanned aircraft over open-air assemblies of human beings. The remote pilot may only operate a small unmanned aircraft over people if the operation is within or over a closed or restricted access site, and all of the people on the site are on notice that a small drone may be flying over them. The small unmanned aircraft does not maintain sustained flight over any person unless that person is participating directly in the operation, is located under a covered structure or inside a stationary vehicle that can provide reasonable protection from a falling small unmanned aircraft. Now, Category 4 allows small unmanned aircraft that are issued an airworthy certificate. Now, that's only issued by the FAA. This allows you to operate over people, providing the operation limitations specified in its approved flight manual or as otherwise specified by the administrator do not prohibit operations over people. Additionally, no remote pilot in command may operate a drone in sustained flight over open-air assemblies unless the operation is compliant with remote ID. Now, to preserve the continued airworthiness of a small unmanned aircraft and continue to meet the level of reliability that the FAA finds acceptable for operating over people, in accordance with Category 4, additional requirements apply, such as applicable regulations to nighttime operations. So sustained flight defined is worth noting that sustained flight over open-air assemblies includes hovering over above the heads of persons gathered in an open-air assembly, flying back and forth over an open-air assembly of people, or circling above the assembly in such a way that the small unmanned aircraft remains above some part of the assembly. Sustained flight over an open-air assembly of people in Category 1, 2, or 4 does not include a brief one-time transiting over a portion of the assembled gathering, where the transit is merely incidental to a point-to-point operation unrelated to the assembly. Now, the change in rule permits operations over moving vehicles, provided the small unmanned aircraft operation meets the requirements of Category 1, 2, or 3, and either. The small unmanned aircraft must remain within or over a closed or restricted access site, and all people inside a moving vehicle within the closed or restricted access site must be on notice that a small unmanned aircraft may fly over them, or the small unmanned aircraft does not maintain sustained flight over moving vehicles. A remote pilot may also conduct operations over moving vehicles with an SUAS that is eligible for Category 4 operations, providing the applicable operating limitations in the approved flight manual or as otherwise specified by the administrator do not prohibit such operation. Category 2 and 3 Declaration of Compliance. Now again, for Category 1, the FAA does not require a declaration of compliance. Now, for an SUAS to be eligible for Category 2 or 3 operations, the person who produces, designs, or modifies the SUAS must submit a declaration of compliance to the FAA via an electronic form on the FAA website. Now, at the time of this video being made, these were the website links for application to apply for the Declaration of Compliance. If you're watching this in the far future and these links are invalid, just Google it. The DOC involves certification of two key considerations: means of compliance with SUAS safety level criteria, and procedures for record keeping and owner notification. Now, the Declaration of Compliance involves certification that the SUAS complies with the appropriate safety level for impact of kinetic energy and exposed rotating parts standards through the FAA accepted means of compliance. Now, the means of compliance generally consists of three types as summarized here. It would be an FAA approved, an FAA accepted means of compliance developed by a voluntary consensus standards body or other entity. A custom would be an FAA accepted custom means of compliance developed independently of the FAA. An FAA provided pre-accepted means of compliance. At the time of this tutorial being made, the FAA refers students to the 2016 Advisory Circular for detailed information regarding means of compliance. If you're watching this in the future, this information could change. Again, just Google the answer and you'll find it on the FAA website. Record-keeping requirements. A declaration of compliance involves certification that the person who submits the DOC maintains a process to notify owners and the FAA of any unsafe conditions that render the drone non-compliant. It will correct any safety defects the FAA identifies, will allow the FAA access to its facilities and any documents, records, or reports that are required to be kept, and records related to the Declaration of Compliances must be maintained for a minimum of 2 years after ceasing the manufacturing of that particular SUAS. Substantiating data for a custom means of compliance must be retained for as long as the means of compliance remains accepted. If the person who holds an FAA-accepted DOC determines that the drone no longer meets the safety level for the category declared or contains any safety defect, he or she must notify the owners of the SUAS, they must notify the public, and they must notify the FAA. The person who holds the Declaration of Compliance must exercise due diligence to ensure the intended audience receives communications about potential unsafe conditions. Notification could take on several forms, including but not limited to a notice on a website, electronic notification to owners who have registered the SUAS, such as email, an update to the SUAS software. If a Category 2 or Category 3 label affixed to a small unmanned aircraft is damaged, destroyed, or missing, a remote pilot in command must label the aircraft in English such that the label is legible, prominent, and will remain on the drone for the duration of the operation before conducting operations over human beings. The label must correctly identify the category or categories of operations that the small unmanned aircraft is qualified to conduct in accordance with this subpart D. The FAA again does not require labeling of a drone for Category 1 operations, but for Category 2 or 3 operations, the drone must be labeled to indicate each eligible category. That is, Category 2 drone must be labeled Category 2, Category 3 drone labeled Category 3, etc. The label must be, again, in English, legible, prominent, and permanent. For Category 4 operations, the SUAS must comply with labeling requirements as specified in the Type Certificate. That's an SUAS certification found within the certification approval of the FAA. And again, if that label becomes damaged, detached in any way, the remote pilot in command must immediately relabel the SUAS. If the SUAS is modified and is no longer qualified for a previous labeled category, the person who performed the modification must remove or cover the previous label, so only the label with the newly qualified category is visible. Now, this rule allows routine operations of a small SUAS at night under two conditions. Nighttime operations doesn't really change under flying over human beings, but they want to define that the remote pilot in command must complete an updated initial knowledge test or online recurrent training regarding nighttime operations. That must be current. And the small unmanned aircraft, of course, must also have anti-collision lighting visible for at least 3 statute miles that has a flash rate sufficient to avoid a collision. And the means of compliance to operations over people at night do not change due to conditions of night, such as nighttime operations must still use anti-collision lighting. And in this photo, that drone, that Phantom, does not have anti-collision lighting. Manufacturers who produce an SUAS eligible to operate over people at night will most likely need to consider the mass of the anti-collision lighting when declaring that the SUAS fulfills its safety levels. This is an example of proper anti-collision lighting on this Mavic 2, affixed to the top of the drone so that it is visible to manned pilot aircraft from above. All right, let's get into some practice questions. Which category of operations over people require that the drone will not cause injury equivalent to or greater than the impact of 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy? It is not Category 1, and that would be Category 2. And it's not Category 4 either. Which category allows for operations to be conducted over a closed or restricted access site? Which category allows for operations to be conducted over a closed or restricted access site? And that is Category 3. Which category does not require the labeling of a drone and does not require a DOC? And of course, that is Category 1. Is a remote pilot in command permitted to operate a drone that is classified in more than one category? Now, I think you might remember that's a yes, but only if the remote pilot cannot inadvertently switch between modes or configurations. Inadvertently. Which category or categories must the drone manufacturer provide the remote pilot operating instructions? The drone manufacturer must provide the remote pilot operating instructions for Categories 2 and 3. Which category of drones must have an airworthiness certificate issued by the FAA? And that would be Category 4, the larger drones. Can the FAA revoke a means of compliance? Can the FAA revoke a means of compliance? Yes, but only when the FAA determines the MOC no longer meets compliance requirements. Which category restrictions change for operations over people at night? Which category restrictions change when flying over people at night? None. No restrictions change. For Category 3 operations, the SUAS must not cause injury equivalent to or greater than the impact of. Category 2 was 11 foot-pounds. Category 3 is 25. And that's it for this flying over crowds of people tutorial, otherwise known as flying over human beings and flying over people.